Chapter 12 centers on object and object relation databases. So the objectives that we're going to go over is as follows. We'll review an overview of the object database concepts. We'll talk about object relational features, object database extensions to SQL, ODMG and object model, and the object definition language, ODL, the object database conceptual design, and the object query language, OQL, and then an overview of C++ language binding. Object and object relational databases. Object databases, ODBs, are a type of object data management system, so ODMS. They meet some of the needs of more complex applications. Specifically, they allow you to structure complex objects and operations that can be applied to those objects. Introduction to object-oriented concepts and features, the origins of object-oriented programming. Object has two basic components. It has states and behaviors. So you essentially have values, and then you have things that can interact upon those values. You have an instance variable. Those are attributes that hold values that define internal state of the object. Operation is defined in two parts. One is the signature, which is essentially the interface. The second is the implementation, which is the method which implements the interface. Inheritance is the concept that allows you to, it permits the specification of new types or classes that inherit much of their structure and or operation from previously defined types or classes. Operator overloading is the concept of having one operator that has the ability to be applied to different types of objects. Operation name may refer to several distinct implementations. Object has a unique identity implemented via a unique system-generated object identifier, so an OID. And generally speaking, objects are immutable. At least the unique identifier is. Most object-oriented database systems allow for the representation of both objects and literals, simple or complex values. The complex type structures for objects and literals. The structure for arbitrary is of arbitrary complexity. It contains all the necessary information that describes objects or literals. Nesting type constructs generate complex types from other types, type constructors, type generators. You have atomic or an atom, which is a basic data type such as an int, string, or etc. A struct or tuple, which is a bit more complex, typically made up of either structs or atoms. And then you have collections, which there can be kind of a variation and combination of these various things together. A collection is essentially something that stores other things, simplest being something like an array, could be a dictionary or an associative array, a list, any number of ways of containing things. Collection types include things like sets, bags, lists, arrays, and dictionaries. Object definition language is used to define object types for a particular database application. Figure 12.1 is an example of specifying the object types for an employee, date, and department using type constructors. Encapsulation of operations. Encapsulation is related to abstract data types. It defines a behavior of a class object based upon operations that can be externally applied. External users are only aware of the interface of the operations. Can be divided structurally between objects into visible and hidden attributes. So basically, the idea is that you have an interface, a specification of how you're going to talk to something, but you don't necessarily know about the internal implementations of that interface. Encapsulation of operations, you have a constructor operation. This is used whenever an object is being created to initialize the state to some anticipated or desired state, and oftentimes supplied with parameters. A destructor operator is something that is used to destroy or delete an object, to clean up or whatever it might be. A modifier operation is something that modifies the state of an object or changes it in some way. So it's essentially something that allows for manipulation of the values associated with the various fields within the object. A retrieve operation and a dot notation to apply operations to an object. Transient objects exist in execution. Whenever a program is executing, they disappear once a program terminates. Persistent objects are those which are stored in a database and persist after object termination. Naming mechanism assigns an object is assigned a unique name in the database. The user finds that object by that name. Reachability refers to ability of an object to be referenced from another or from other persistent objects, object location through the references. So basically you can reach it by starting with some other objects that have been persisted. Figure 12.3 contains the process of creating persistent objects by naming and reachability. A type or a class of hierarchies and inheritance. Inheritance it's basically the definition of new types based upon other predefined types, leads to type or class hierarchy, type name and list of visible public functions, attributes, or operations. The format is type name : function, function, function. The basic idea here is that you're defining a particular behavior or instance of or type of an object based upon ones that you have previously defined. The idea here is that there is some behavior that is perhaps shared amongst multiple types of things. You want to define it on the base type and then have the derived types be able to either extend it or augment it or utilize common functionality without having to re-implement it. And the basic driver of all of that is software reuse, code reuse, to minimize the creation of new things. A subtype is useful whenever creating a new type that is similar but not identical to an already defined type. That is that new thing that you're creating based upon something else. A subtype inherits functions, additional local or specific functions in the subtype. An example is an employee is a subtype of a person. They have a salary, a hire date, and a seniority. A student is a subtype of a person that has a major and a GPA, and likely a person has something like a name and maybe some identifying capability, maybe a social. An extent, a named persistent object to hold a collection of all persistent objects for a class. A persistent collection is stored permanently in the database. Transient collection exists temporarily during the execution of the program and then goes away once the program terminates. Polymorphism of operations is also known as operator overloading. The idea is that one method may do different things depending upon what it's associated with. Allows some operator name or symbol to be bound to two or more different implementations. Types of objects determines which operator is being applied. You have multiple inheritance. This is where a subtype inherits functions, attributes, and operations from more than one supertype. Not every language allows such things, or databases allow such things. Sometimes they restrict you to single inheritance because it gets complex if you do multiple. A summary of the object database concepts. You have this concept of an object identity, some way of finding that object in a unique way. Type constructors, these are type generators. Encapsulation of operations, programming language compatibility, type and class hierarchies and inheritance, extents and polymorphism, and operator overloading.